So, thank you very much for the invitation. Probably it's the Austrian style that those people from Austria have to walk from one side to the other one. I would like to do it in the same way. I have been told that my presentation is by far too long, so I've used a lot of slides. So I will rush through those slides very fast, and hopefully afterwards we have the possibility to have some discussion on those ones. What I'm going to do is I would like to explain you about GRI. I consider GRI as a kind of strategy or the backbone in order to develop environmental sustainability. By doing this, I would like to give you a short overview on Denkstatt. Probably Denkstatt is by far not so famous like Mondi or Cosmote, but we are trying the best in order to do it. At the same time, there are huge developments in GRI, especially in direction of GRI 4. I would like to give you a kind of forecast how this topic is going to develop. But my opinion is that companies need to do much more than reporting. There are a lot of topics where you can address your activities, starting with the supply chain, talking to different kind of stakeholders, integrating environmental issues in your core products. A few sentences about Denkstatt. Denkstatt is one of the leading consultancy company on environment and sustainability. As you can see on the slide, we're covering starting from management system, direction of topic of climate change and energy management, going in direction of sustainable development. But at the end of the day, also the question, how big is the impact of a single product, like for example, a Coca-Cola bottle? How big is the impact in terms of carbon? How big is the impact in terms of water footprinting? The client space is typically big multinational companies, although I need to say that also small and medium-sized companies are very important clients and customers of us. We are typically heading towards Central and Eastern Europe, whereas probably you will mention, well, Spain is not typically Central and Eastern Europe, but sometimes business development happens by coincidence. Going in the direction of global reporting initiatives. If you look at the GRI and the standard on sustainability reporting, you figure out that there are quite some topics you need to cover. And one of those topics is, for example, the topic of environment or ecology. And in the GRI index, you will figure out that in this context, you have to cover all in all 30 indicators. And when you open the GRI, it makes, oh, you really need to cover all those kind of things. And in a lot of companies, it causes a kind of, I would call it frustration, because it's quite tricky to cover all those things, starting from energy topics, going to water, discussing about CO2 emissions or greenhouse gas emissions. CO2 is the easy thing, but if you go, for example, to the other greenhouse gas emissions like methane or chlorinated hydrocarbons, then it's going to be really tricky in order to discuss on it. And when there's the necessity to talk about biodiversity on a company's level, it's rather tricky. So therefore, I think the GRI is a good starting point. I think it gives you a good overview, but I think there might be also some other strategies you might focus on. So what I would like to address is to put out a few strategies where you might develop your business. I would like to cover the topic on supply chain. Secondly, I would like to address that if you don't manage to integrate sustainability in your core business, you will probably are going to fail. Third thing is it's all about strategy, so long-term strategy, and don't forget about your stakeholders. At the end of the day, it's also about topics like environmental management system and reporting by itself. One topic what we have been covering heavily within the last years, it's about water footprinting. Water footprinting is one topic, how you can evaluate the impact of a product. So now we are talking not about the company, really about the product, the impact of a product on the water. If I take the context of Coca-Cola, and Coca-Cola is probably a very famous brand here, if you drink a liter of Coca-Cola, then if you produce 1 liter of beverage, In the production, in the bottling plant, you will consume about 2 liters of water in order to produce this beverage. But, and here it comes the big but, if you go back to the supply chain, then you end up with a number of 35 to 40 liters of water consumption. And this is very much calculated with one concept, which is called water footprinting. I won't go into much details how the calculation works. So the question is, if the Coca-Cola company is going to be addressed by different NGOs, guys, in your supply chain, you use much more water, what can you do? Probably it makes sense to go into the key ingredients of what Coca-Cola consists of. What do you think? The beverage Coca-Cola, what is it except water? Okay, good one. So sugar is one of the key ingredients which is driving water consumption. So therefore, maybe it would make sense to work together with the sugar industry. And this was the project with all different kind of sugar suppliers all over Europe in order to figure out where sugar production in terms of water consumption is sustainable or less sustainable. So, which at the end of the day leads us to a water footprinting impact assessment where different regions have been assessed in terms of quality issues, so water quality issues, and quantity issues. And at the end of the day, if you look at this graph, you see the region number 2, where you have a kind of moderate risk plus the beet sugar production in those regions have a quite important role. So it would make sense that companies like Coca-Cola starting working together with the beet sugar or with the sugar providers in order to reduce the water consumption in those regions. So first of all, think about your supply chain, think about the value chain. Second thing, and I'm very happy that the telecommunication industry is also on the panel, I think there are wonderful potentials to integrate sustainability in your core business. So in the telecommunication industry, you have the solution that you might offer video conferencing or also telepresence, which are interesting technologies in order to reduce traveling activities. By doing this, those kind of 2 solutions might be wonderful activities to increase your market share, to increase your turnover. So therefore, especially video conferencing, WebEx technology for small and medium-sized companies. If you talk about telepresence, it's wonderful to work with big multinational companies. Plus, if you have these kind of technologies available, hopefully you're using it also internally. If I'm going to the financial service industry, and probably this is not the most loved industry at the moment, but at the same time, I do believe that there are banks who really see an opportunity in going green. Going green means maybe to integrate it in the business model. So if I take the German Environmental Bank, they have been very, very successful in just investing in environmental friendly products. Credit volume of 1.8 billion euro. So therefore, you might change your business model, you might change your products, and it might be very, very beneficiary for your turnover and also for your economic development. One other aspect, what you might think about it, it's all about strategy. Very often when I'm talking about long-term strategy, companies telling me, well, we don't know what we are doing the next 2 or 3 years. If you really look at the top performers in terms of sustainability, those companies really try to plan within 10 years or 15 years. So, which means this is the horizontal X. If you go to the vertical X, then it shows how to integrate the different value chains. Some parts of it you might influence, but for example, if I take the example of Cosmode, what your customers or clients are doing with finally with the mobile telephone, this is not 100% influenced by you. So therefore, working with your clients and consumers, but also working with the supply chain might be very beneficiary and interesting at the end of the day. Oops, this was too fast. Stakeholder engagement. I don't know how many of you are aware of, in my opinion, very useful standard. It's called AE1000. It tells you, or it gives you a kind of guidance how to work with stakeholders. It's based on three principles, which means inclusivity, materiality, and responsiveness. Inclusivity means which of the stakeholders do you include? Materiality is what are the hot topics for your stakeholders? Responsiveness means at the end of the day, how do you interact with your stakeholders? In my opinion, very useful standard should be really used by a lot of companies. EMAS, totally underestimated in Romania. I think there are very, very little companies in Romania who have implemented EMAS, so the European Environmental Management Scheme, in my opinion, and there are a lot of studies who showed that the environmental performance of EMAS companies are by far higher than the companies which are dealing with ISO 14001. So therefore, EMAS really represents an opportunity, and in the meantime, with EMAS 3, you have the potential that EMAS has been verified or validated on a global level, not just within the European Union. But EMAS might be also as a starting point in direction of CSR reporting, although when you see the graph, the amount of reports just covering environmental issues is going down and down, and the tendency in direction of corporate responsibility reporting is growing and growing. But there's a new tendency in the meantime, or at least if I look to the UK market, a lot of companies do move away from CSR reporting, they move away from sustainability reporting and go in direction of integrated reporting. If I take example, Coca-Cola Hellenic here, which is dealing in the Central and Eastern European market, they've been delivering a CSR report for the last 10 years. They have implemented now or issued now the first integrated annual report, which gives you a fuller understanding of the business performance than just looking at a simple CSR report. What are the developments in terms of GRI 4? Probably you have been concerned within the last period about the different grades within GRI, which means ABC levels, plus, which means that it's externally verified or validated. The new development is all these levels will be excluded in the future in GRI 4, because in my opinion, they have been understood very wrongly, which means until now, A+ or B+ have been seen as a kind of quality level. In my opinion, it's not at all a quality level, it's more a level of transparency. So therefore, GRI 4 means to you not any more levels, A, B, C, there won't be any label anymore in the future. Second thing, this is an interesting movement, it's about the value chain. So in the future, if you're going to report according to GRI, you need to map your total value chain. And the second thing, you need to identify what are the material issues in your value chain. This might lead us to some very interesting projects, hopefully. On the other side, it might lead also to a kind of additional complexity on GRI reporting standards. So therefore, I'm really curious how this GRI 4 will be implemented in the companies, because having a clear picture about the value chain and having a clear picture of what are the hot topics there is really quite an exercise which needs to be addressed. I jump over this one and come to my key findings in order to stay within the timetable. In my opinion, GRI is a useful framework. I think you should use them as a kind of starting point, but at the end of the day, probably you need to address also other topics. LCA, life cycle assessment, I really appreciate the presentation from Mondi, where you can see that actually to be economic, successful, and to have environmental friendly products is not at all a kind of contradiction. It really works very well. So therefore, thank you very much, and looking forward to having some interesting discussion later on. Mulțumesc.